Hi guys, welcome back. This is Dương. Today I'm very happy to tell you my lesson for Day of the Dead. But first, how you feel now? Okay, do as I say. Emotional peak. Emotional peak. When we winning. Emotional peak. Okay, and now start. Here we go. Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead. I arrived Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I'm curious about this holiday, so I go to the cemetery to see what's happening. What I find is quite interesting. The atmosphere like a party. There are people everywhere. Families are sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. They clean the graves and add fresh flowers. I walk through the cemetery and admire the beauty of all colorful flowers. There is also color in the sky because many kids are flying kites. Some families having a picnic. They eat, drink, and chat together. People laugh and smile. Okay, and now AJ will ask and I will answer. Okay, wait for me a few minutes.
Any answer.
Okay, I'm
You
here.
must answer every question.
Yes.
Use your pause button if necessary. Okay, let's begin.
Let's start.
Okay, here we go. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala?
Yes.
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive?
Guatemala. You arrived Guatemala.
Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala.
Yes.
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead?
You, AJ.
Well, me, AJ. Right? I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd?
No, not November 3rd.
No, I didn't arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. What day did I arrive in Guatemala?
On the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. Where did I arrive on November 1st?
Guatemala.
Well, Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I was curious about this holiday, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Was I angry about this holiday?
No, you weren't angry.
No, I wasn't angry about this holiday. Was I sad about this holiday?
No, you were sad.
No, I wasn't sad about this holiday. I was curious about this holiday.
Yes.
Who was curious about this holiday?
You, AJ.
Well, I was, AJ. I was curious about this holiday. Which holiday was I curious about?
The Day of the Dead.
Which holiday was I
The Day
curious
of the
about?
Dead.
The Day of the Dead. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. Was I curious about the Day of the Dead? Or was I curious about Christmas?
You was curious about the Day of the Dead.
No, I was curious about the Day of the Dead, of course. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. So, I went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
Oh.
Where did I go?
You went to the cemetery.
To the cemetery.
To the
I
cemetery.
went to the cemetery.
Yes.
Did I go to the cemetery or did I go to the airport?
You went to the cemetery.
Yeah, I went to the cemetery. Who went to the cemetery?
You, AJ.
Well, me, right, AJ. I went to the cemetery. Where did I go?
You went to the
To
cemetery.
the cemetery. Right,
To the
I
cemetery.
went to the cemetery. When did I go to the cemetery?
On November 1st, the Day of the Dead.
November 1st, the Day of the Dead. Right? I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Why did I go to the cemetery?
Because to see what's happening.
To see what was happening.
To see what was
I
happening.
went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Who went to the cemetery to see what was happening?
You, AJ. Of course.
Me, AJ, went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
Yes.
Where was the cemetery?
In Guatemala.
In Guatemala. The cemetery was in Guatemala.
Yes.
What is the Day of the Dead?
Holiday is a holiday.
A holiday. The Day of the Dead is a holiday. When is the Day of the Dead?
November 1st.
November 1st.
Yes.
The Day of the Dead
November 1st.
was and is November 1st.
Yes.
Okay. So I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead to see what was happening.
Ah.
What I found was quite interesting.
Oh.
Was it boring?
No.
No, it wasn't boring. Was it interesting?
Yes, it was interesting.
Yes, it was interesting. The cemetery was interesting.
Quite interesting.
How did I feel
You thought interesting.
about the cemetery?
You felt interesting.
I felt it was interesting. Or I thought it was interesting.
Yes.
Was it boring or was it interesting?
It was interesting.
It was interesting. Of course, it was interesting. What was interesting?
The cemetery, the
The
holiday.
cemetery. The cemetery was interesting. When was the cemetery interesting?
The Day of the Dead, November 1st.
It was interesting on the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
Yes.
Okay, the atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
Oh.
Was the atmosphere very sad?
No,
No, the atmosphere was not sad.
not sad.
The atmosphere was like a party.
Party.
The atmosphere was very happy.
Very happy. Very happy.
Was the atmosphere sad or happy?
The atmosphere was happy.
The atmosphere was happy.
Happy.
The atmosphere was like a party.
Like a party.
What was like a party?
The atmosphere was like a party.
The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Where was the atmosphere like a party?
The cemetery. The cemetery.
In the cemetery. Right? The cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house?
No.
No, not at my house.
Not
The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery.
In the cemetery.
The atmosphere was not like a party in my house.
Yes.
So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Oh.
Where were the families sitting?
Around the graves.
Around the graves. Right? They were sitting around the graves.
Yes. The graves.
Who was sitting around the graves?
The families. The families.
The families. Right? The families were sitting around the graves.
Correct.
Were they sitting around the trees?
No.
No, they weren't sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves.
Graves. Graves.
So, where were they sitting?
Around the graves.
Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Oh.
Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, they were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their friends?
No, not really.
No, not really. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Yes.
Who was sitting around the graves?
Families.
That's right. Families were sitting around the graves.
Were sitting around.
Whose graves were they sitting around?
Their dead ancestors.
Graves were they sitting around?
Their ancestors. Their ancestors.
Their dead ancestors.
Their dead ancestors.
Their ancestors' graves. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Yes.
Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors or the graves of their friends?
Their dead ancestors. They were sitting
Ancestors,
around.
right? They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Okay. Who cleaned the graves?
Families.
That's right, the families.
The families.
What did they add?
They add fresh flowers.
They added fresh
Fresh
flowers.
Added.
Did they add food?
They didn't add food.
No, they didn't add food. Did they add money?
No, they didn't add
No,
money.
they didn't add money. They added fresh
They added fresh flowers. Yes, fresh flowers.
What did they clean?
They cleaned the graves.
They cleaned
The
the
graves.
graves. Whose graves did they clean?
Their dead ancestors.
Their ancestors.
Their
right?
ancestors.
They cleaned their ancestors' graves. Where did they add flowers?
They add flowers
Where?
to the graves.
Well,
On
they
the
added
graves.
flowers to the graves.
The graves. To the
That's right.
graves.
They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Good. I walked through the cemetery and admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
Oh.
Where did I walk?
Through the cemetery.
Through the cemetery.
Through the
I walked
You
through
walked through
the cemetery. Did I walk through the park?
No, you didn't walk through
No,
the
I
park.
didn't walk through the park. I walked through the cemetery. Where did I walk?
Through the cemetery.
Through the cemetery.
Yes.
Who walked through the cemetery?
You, AJ.
I did. AJ. I walked through the cemetery.
You did.
Did I walk through the cemetery or did I walk through the park?
You walked through the cemetery.
I walked through the cemetery. That's right.
Yes. Correct.
And I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Did I admire the beauty of the trees?
No.
No.
Not the
I didn't admire the beauty of the trees. Did I admire the beauty of the children?
No.
No, I didn't admire the beauty of the children. What did I admire?
You admire the beauty, colorful
Flowers,
flowers.
right? Yeah, I admired
Flowers.
the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Who admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers?
You, AJ.
Yeah, that's right. AJ, me, admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
Yes.
Where were the flowers? Yeah. On the graves. Right?
On the
In
graves.
the cemetery.
In the cemetery.
Right? The flowers were on the graves in the cemetery.
Yes.
Were the flowers in the park?
No.
No, they weren't in the park.
What? In the park.
Were the flowers in my house?
No. It was
No,
my
they
house.
weren't in my house.
Your house.
Where were the flowers?
The flower in the graves.
The flowers
Graves.
were
In the
on
cemetery.
the graves in the cemetery.
Yes.
Where did I walk?
Through the cemetery.
I walked through the cemetery. When did I walk through the cemetery?
Okay. That's all about the day of the dead today. Thank you for listening and make crazy today. Okay, right? Okay, thank you.